Yeah, man. I think they did great.
Do a real come out of that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, man. I think they did awesome.
Okay. Oh man. Okay. Jesus Christ.
You were not expecting that.
God,
man.
I was not at all.
That's gonna be great for the vocal ride. I don't think this is gonna make the cut anyway.
Yeah. I don't.
Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of your favorite podcast, That Would Be Rad. A podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs, pre-internet mysteries, and raising our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. We're your hosts, Woody Brown.
And Tyler Bentz. How's it going, dude?
Dude, it's going awesome. Right out of the gate, a quick little thing that we talked about in the last episode. I thought you were going to ask me already, but you haven't. Whether or not I watched that movie, Sudden Death.
Ooh.
Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you're going to have to go back into the last episode where I talked about what this movie is. But essentially,
How
to
was
answer your, it's pretty tough, bro. Here's the thing. It's definitely just like a rated R action movie. Let me give you a little quick, small, short premise. And this is why it gets tough and rough, okay? So basically, this lady essentially, like, gets raped. Anyways, this lady gets, like, she's like a rape victim, okay? And the whole premise of the movie is, like, the guy that she's with kind of treats her poorly. After that, like, it was her fault kind of deal. So she just goes on this, like, rampage of vengeance because
that's cool.
Apparently in like New York City in the 80s, you could just, be walking down the street and basically it took like catcalling to a whole new level. Anyways, she just goes on this like rampage and starts killing these folks.
Catcallers.
That are, not even, like that are trying to like take advantage of her and drug her. There's like this underground like thing where dudes are like, I don't know. I kind of stopped it after about 30 minutes because some of the, we'll just call it taking advantage of scenes were a little much for my for my taste there. So, anyways, it was interesting. And I guess it was kind of like a cool idea, but
I do love a good like revenge tale.
Oh yeah, man. I mean, it's kind of my favorite favorite thing, really. Things that come to mind: Punisher, The Crow.
And those are the two. Thanks for stopping by, folks.
That's it. All right. Well, that's it. That's our show for the week. Okay, so now I'm really excited about this week's show because, well, first let me just say this. 1986, arguably, is one of the, I don't want to say best years for movies that were released, but I got to tell you, it might be one of like the top, I don't know, 2 or 3 years in terms of like what movies were released and what movies I saw as a kid that just like had a huge impact. I'm just going to list a couple and you're just going to immediately, you and the listener are going to immediately agree with me. You ready?
Let's do it.
Top Gun. Ever heard of it? Cobra, Critters, Platoon, The Fly, Stand By Me, Karate Kid Part 2, Labyrinth, Highlander, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Big Trouble in Little China, Short Circuit, Crocodile Dundee, The Great Mouse Detective, Transformers the Movie, Maximum Overdrive, The Money Pit, Legend. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, dude. It's really, like, honestly, when I started looking at this, it's kind of remarkable. It's kind of blowing my mind. And 2 other movies that at some point we have to do, Thrashin', the skateboard movie with Josh Brolin, and Rad.
He's in it?
Oh, yeah, dude, he's the main character.
I didn't know that. I mean, I haven't seen it in years.
Used to ride a skateboard.
Wow, that's amazing.
And I mean, dude, I'm not even joking. I have a list here of just tons and tons and tons of movies that came out that year that just had a huge impact on me as, I guess, at that time, a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old, maybe whenever I finally saw them. And one of them that we're going to talk about today, man, I was obsessed with, and my brother and I probably have seen it a million times. I mean, this is just one of the greatest movies that came out at the time. And ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to talk about The Flight.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
America's future can be determined by our dreams and our visions.
It was very intense, bright light.
For over 200 years, there have been reports of giant man-like creatures.
From another dimension, another world, I don't know.
The most intriguing mystery on the North American continent.
You're listening to That Would Be Rad.
David, what time did you enter the woods?
Around 8 o'clock.
Then what happened?
Then I reached this cliff.
It's transmitting in alpha waves with complex frequency patterns in them.
I know I fell.
It's 1986, man. 8 years since that night. This is totally rad. I mean, you're my big little brother.
I think you should take a look at this. Where did this come from? From the mind of a 12-year-old boy?
He's hurt. He's calling me. His voice keeps calling, saying something over and over and over, but I can't understand very much. Help you.
Sit down, Navigator. You have the information I require to complete my mission. I have been sent from Phalon to borrow samples of life from different galaxies for study. On this planet, I chose you.
Why me?
Why not?
Okay, which way is Fort Lauderdale?
I only know what's in your head. You don't know the way from your house to the 7-Eleven.
Today, we're going to talk about The Flight of the Navigator.
Yes.
Let me go downstairs real quick.
God dang it.
I'm sorry, man. Hold on just a second. I don't want it to interrupt our show any further. 1 second.
Okay. What you guys don't understand is Woody's taking a break right now to take another, what I like to call a sudden death break. He just keeps disappearing and going off. and watching that movie for 2 minutes at a time. Cracking myself up.
All right.
God, I cannot wait for you to listen to what I just said.
My God.
It was. What's funny is I could barely even get through it because I'm just laughing at the whole time.
I can't even imagine what it could be. Okay, a couple quick things. Number one, I got to say, like I said before, was obsessed with this movie as a kid, watched it all the time. And, you know, as a 20-something-year-old, wanted to kind of revisit that movie and revisit that feeling, that nostalgia. Basically, my now wife and I rented it, and we watched it, and boy, she was just, this is like, I mean, literally like 20 years ago. And she was not having it. She was like, this. And even whenever I watched it at that point, I wasn't having it.
Really?
Now, watching it again, I completely disagree. I think we'll get to what we think about it in just a second. But some quick things about The Flight of the Navigator for all you cinephiles is that it was directed by Randall Kleiser. Not sure about the pronunciation. Probably did it wrong. And written by a guy named Mark H. Baker. Now, interesting fact here. This is actually the first screenplay that Mark Baker wrote ever in his life.
Wow.
It was originally called Vanished. And he said that the idea for this screenplay came from a dream he had. So all of this was basically something that he dreamt. And it was much different than kind of what we ended up getting. I saw this documentary that, again, we'll also talk about in a few minutes, where he kind of talked about how, before it got in the hands of Disney, essentially there was this whole piece in the script about how the kid and the alien essentially built the spaceship from nothing, just using like these memories and stuff. And there's this huge sequence. And Randall Kleiser, the director, so he directed Flight of the Navigator, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, The Blue Lagoon, Grease. So the guy, has some pretty serious, like big movies under his belt, by the time that he did this one. The basic sort of story, if you're listening and you never watched this movie, although, honestly, it was such a huge part of my childhood that I can't imagine anybody skipping this one.
But it's funny you're saying that because, this would have been, pre-internet. And I remember there was a period where again, I would have seen it when I was 5 probably. And I'll get into that later. But I do remember there was like a period where I couldn't, because I had seen it when I was so little that I couldn't remember the name of it. And like, it was that sort of like mystery of like, what was that movie?
Really?
And like, obviously there was no way to look up, hop on the internet and figure it out. But there was like a little like area that I remember in my youth where I could not remember what it was called.
Man.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So if you haven't seen this movie, here's the basic plot. There may or may not be spoilers here.
I think it's all right.
Yeah. So essentially, what do you mean, man? You don't want people, I don't want people to know the ending.
Well, you're right.
Basically, this 12-year-old boy, David Freeman, is, like the one sentence plot is he gets abducted by an alien spaceship and then finds himself caught in a world that has changed all around him, meaning there's a huge loss of time thing. This isn't like kind of what we've talked about in other episodes where people just can't explain a couple hours. Essentially, this kid, it kind of all starts, you've heard us describe this scene that really stuck with us as kids where, he and his brother are in the woods at night. It's actually, the movie's set July 4th of 1978 in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. This is another thing that I actually really liked about the movie. A lot of times when you're watching a movie, especially like 80s movies or something, they tend to, look at like Home Alone, for example. These people are in this gigantic house. They don't really explain, what Kevin McAllister's dad does, anything like that. In this movie, to me, it was really true to sort of like middle class America.
Right.
And, nothing too ritzy. You just immediately feel those like 1986 vibes, man. Everything from like the clothes and all that stuff. So I really...
But there's also... You go ahead.
I was just going to say, I really liked that about it. It just felt more real.
Well, that, and then, but I also think there was a little bit, and even watching it now, it's like I can kind of, like, I remember as a kid watching it, and there was a little bit of sort of like an exotic kind of vibe because, you later, but like when I was a kid, I grew up in North Georgia where we had, we had mountains and a bunch of forest and beautiful kind of land, and so my childhood was like playing in the woods and the creek and that kind of thing. And I do remember as a kid seeing this and there being a little bit of like an exotic vibe of like them living in the beach and or living near the beach or whatever. And then like at the end,
yeah, when
they just like hop in their boats.
Yeah, especially like where you grew up, not around the lake, even though like where we are now, huge lake. So yeah, the movie starts. Actually, I got to tell you this too. There's a couple, I don't know if you noticed this rewatching it, but even in the opening credits, there's like a couple misdirects kind of.
Oh, dude, I wrote down every single one.
Yeah, me too, man. It's so cool because it's like, so cool. As a viewer that this movie is about like UFOs or something, right?
Yep.
And the movie opens and you see this like shiny saucer flying through the air and you're like, oh man, there's like this ominous music that's playing in the background.
It's like metallic.
Yeah, it's like shiny and almost like chrome looking. And you're like, oh man, here we go.
Here it comes.
And all of a sudden, like, you realize just at the last second, basically, that it's a Frisbee and a dog like catches it in its mouth. And then it like does like a like a wide shot of this like Frisbee competition for dogs.
Yeah.
And so that was like the first misdirect. And then later on, at the end of that competition, which I do want to talk about this Frisbee competition in a minute, but at the end of that, the kid's getting in his car, in the like station wagon with his family, and there's this like big shadow that appears above their heads. And then again, this mysterious music plays, and the parents kind of like look up into the sky like, what's going on? And everybody's like, and they make like even sort of a surprise or mystified face.
Yeah.
And then it's a blimp. And you're like, okay. And then when you think that's not enough, I think the third one that I wrote down was they're like, I think maybe it's, again, opening credits after that or something, later credit. What?
I thought he was walking through the woods.
Well, no, the one I wrote down was, I think it's when they're still driving and there's, again, music happens and it's like a water tower.
Tower, yeah. Well, for some reason I was thinking that he was walking through the woods, but yeah, you're probably right.
So
yeah, I love that because every single time it's kind of like this. In the water tower one, it's kind of like the camera's kind of like tracking and you're seeing like a tree line, and then all of a sudden, like, I guess it kind of rises like above, and then, you know, behind that tree line you see this huge sort of water tower.
Yeah.
Pretty
and
cool.
Every time, even though I knew, because I've seen this movie a million times, I was like, oh man, like, okay, the Frisbee one I knew because I remember that opening scene. I'll never forget it. But like the water tower part, I was like, here we go. Oh. It's kind of like that scene in Hot Tub Time Machine when they keep on expecting that guy's arm to get chopped off and they're like, yes, here we do. Let's go. And then it doesn't. And they're like, oh, man. So anyways, I got to talk about this freaking, one of the things that just made me laugh, and maybe I'm just ignorant too because I don't have a dog, but this kid is just like completely fascinated by this Frisbee competition. Basically, the owner throws a Frisbee, the dog catches it. That's the competition. And he's like, next year, I just can't wait. And their dog's name is Bruiser.
Which is awesome.
So could it be any more 80s than that?
Yeah.
And so this kid's...
I have a friend named Bruiser. Well, I mean, I call him Bruiser.
You have a friend named Bruiser?
I mean, not his real name, but his name is Bruce.
Oh, okay, got it.
Shout out to Bruce.
What's up, Bruce, the Bruiser?
He's the guy who is responsible for me being a graphic designer. So
very cool. And... it was hilarious to me, like how, I guess, obsessed he was about that. But then, if you rewind back into your brain when you were 12, I thought I was going to be a millionaire with a lemonade stand or like selling baseball cards on the side of literally I sold baseball cards once out of my driveway. And when I said sold, I meant like I just had a table set up. No one stopped, not even other kids. So pretty exciting.
Well, one thing real quick about the dog show is it's like literally probably a good 3 or 4 minutes of him like failing, throwing this Frisbee and his dog not catching it. And the whole time he's just like kind of mumbling under his breath. He's like, oh, come on, Bruiser. Yeah, come on, Bruiser. What are you doing,
What
pal?
are you doing, Bruiser? What's wrong, pal?
And that's like 2 or 3 full minutes of the movie, which is,
interesting choice.
80s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe just, maybe just have that be like 60 seconds.
Yeah, just do it once.
We get it. Hey, Randall, we got it. All right, so let's dive into the plot real quick. So you've heard us talk about this scene before where we've described, these kids going into the woods for whatever reason. It's dark. It's late. It's that classic in the woods scene where there's this like light in the background and then like kind of they've, put the smoke machine, and there's just like this fog and it's just like kind of backlit on these kids.
Yeah. But also you also see in this particular one, which I think we've talked about this with like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But this is the one where since they were kind of in the woods, they have like the little what would be like moon beams kind of shining through. Yeah. It's just it still holds up, still works.
And perfect. You still kind of think it's almost like another misdirect because you think, oh, here we go. This is the reason why it's lit up is because there's a UFO. And I just remembered why he's walking through the woods. He's going to pick up his brother, who essentially went to a neighbor's house to play. So he's going to get
who's 8 years old.
That's awesome.
And also before he leaves, the mom says, "Yeah, just look out for those fireworks." Because like as they're in the car, they look outside at the kids his little brother's friends, and they all just have like lit fireworks in their hands.
Just pointing them at each other. 80s as heck.
And real quick, I did write this down too. Before we move on from this, either his dad or his mom are like, "Hey, go get your brother." And his response is, which, boy, how times have changed. You know, they're in Florida. There's like a mangrove swamp forest, probably. And his brother's like this little, like his older brother, the main character. His like sort of sarcastic responses. I think he can make it for half a mile, Mom. And it's like, there's an 8-year-old who's going to be walking in the dark in a swamp forest. Oh, and also crossing a railroad track. To get back home at night.
Mm-hmm. He's got it.
God.
I mean, my God, man. And so, like, the oldest brother, you know, the main character, David, is only 12, right? And so he's walking through here. He gets his little brother. Their back and forth is always hilarious, like Scuzz Bucket and dehydrated pizza face and all kinds of funny stuff. And I want to say that he's going to get his little brother. His little brother, like, scares him. And
he, like, jumps out of a tree or
something like that. And then David, the main character, falls down this ravine, right, and is knocked unconscious. Well, this is the part where I was like, oh man, this is super, super cool, because again, it deals with this lost time. So he wakes up. Again, this is for the benefit of those who haven't seen it or haven't seen it in a long time, but the kid wakes up and discovers that 8 years have passed, and it's now 1986, right? And so, like,
because it was 1978, right?
And so he goes, you know, I think the police find him, they're asking him questions, and they're, like, bemused, basically, because they see the missing child poster, and it's just like, man, this guy matches the description, right? But, I mean, think about it, like, in your head for a second. You know, like, a rational adult, right? You would just think, and this kid matches the description, but is the same age as he was when he got lost. You would just think, oh, it's got to be a different kid. You know?
Well, he does, the one, I guess, like, detective does say that, and she says, well, I've ran it in the computer 6 times or something, and it's got to be
1986, just computers, man. I've ran it through. You know, I think, looking back, this has got to be, like, my first experience as a kid with concepts like lost time or, even UFOs. I was trying to think, like, I don't think I saw Close Encounters, even though it came out way before this. I don't think I saw it before this. I think this was my introduction to UFOs, right?
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I don't remember. I mean, around that era, obviously, like E.T. would have been.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
But I think that this. I know for a fact I would have seen this movie first.
Yeah.
I don't know. So yeah, this was probably it for me.
So anyhow, now he you know, this section of the movie is around wherever, like, as a kid, sort of freaked me out, because it's like, he can't find his parents. He finds out basically that all this time has passed. He kind of like goes to the house that's how the police get him, essentially, is he walks, quote, like, home, knocks on the door, and there's just, like, these other people that live there. And as a kid, dude, that freaked me out, man. Like, can you imagine, like, going to your house where you've grown up, and there's just other people there? You'd think, somebody's trying to play a trick on me, right? So then...
Well, and then he, like, barges in.
Yeah.
Sorry, my mic. Just hit my mic. Then he, like, barges in and goes in, and there's, like, the old man in, like, a robe.
Yeah,
and,
just in a cocktail.
Like, having a cocktail, and there's some nice, slow, smooth jazz going on in the background.
Yeah, it's like Ron Burgundy.
Yeah, if this kid would have barged in a couple minutes after, I mean, who knows
what old mom and pop might have been doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then, of course, the police get him.
Would have been a different kind of movie.
Yeah. They end up taking him to who his real parents are. And that this is another scene that always kind of was like, oof, because they get there and his parents are, well, first off, is it his brother that answers the door first?
It's his dad, because you kind of see he's kind of like in silhouette at first.
Yeah, that's right.
And then when he jumps out of the car and runs up to go see his dad, he's like, he kind of comes in the light, and it's, you know, you realize that he's
older.
He's older.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, dude.
And then the mom looks a lot older.
Yeah. They really laid that old makeup on thick.
They sure did.
And so that was always a scene that kind of just freaked me out, man. And here is where there is a direct connection to a movie that we talked about last week, and that's the movie North Shore.
What?
Because the main character in North Shore is Matt Adler, and he's the one that plays the grown-up version of this kid's little brother.
Oh, which he was really cool, I thought.
Man.
I liked his character as like the older brother.
I mean, I remember as a kid too, he comes on screen, you're like, man, this dude's cool as heck, man. He's got like, you know, like rolled up sleeves. He knows about like cool music and stuff. And he's like just treating his kid brother, well, his older brother that's a kid, like really well and stuff.
And I would say probably like the coolest part, which again, it was so long ago, I don't remember like the first viewing because I would have seen it. I saw it in the theater, but I remember when the last time that I'd seen it was, I mean, probably early 20s maybe. And I remember having the same feeling then as I did this last time, is like probably the coolest scene in the movie is like, or kind of the most badass scene is like when he's like, and spoiler, the brother like runs up on the roof and he's like lighting the fireworks and like the music's kind of like cool and intense. You know, when he's trying to like send out like the signal flare.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so
and
cool.
Man, I'm glad you mentioned the music because the music I thought was really awesome too, man. Like
I mean, Alan Silvestri,
dude,
man.
and like the synth or whatever that they're using just sounded so awesome. So here's like basically just to kind of like, there's a lot of other like little facts we could just go into, but essentially at the same time, basically, the alien spaceship has like crashed and is now taken by NASA and the U.S. government. They bring in David because they feel like there's some sort of connection there. They bring him in for some testing his brain waves. They figure out basically that he's got this like map to where this thing potentially could be from, like in his head. And so
which is pretty awesome.
It's really cool.
And it also, you may not even know this, Woody, but that's actually a sort of a parallel to the Betty and Barney Hill case. I think it was Betty who, when they would run her through like hypnosis and she was regressed, she had all these sort of star maps like in her brain. And I wonder, like as I was watching that, you know, just today, I wonder if they pulled a little bit of that from this account.
Man, I wonder.
It's pretty cool.
And the guy, I don't know if you recognize the guy that plays like the head scientist at NASA, Dr. Faraday.
Oh, I love him.
The actor's name is Howard, I think it's Hessman. But I remember him from, of course, WKRP in Cincinnati, that show, or reruns of that show. And then the show that I remember him from was that show, Head of the Class. Do you remember that?
No, but wait a minute. What do I remember? I remember him from a movie.
I mean, he's just been in a ton of stuff back in the 80s, but I always thought he was super cool, especially from Head of the Class. That was, again, one of those shows that somehow just made it overseas, and we would watch it like all the time. But, you know, I also attribute this movie to it's one of two movies from my childhood that completely made me obsessed with anything NASA. This movie and the movie Space Camp were two of the reasons why I was obsessed with NASA. Like I just thought, this kid ends up having this NASA hat, and I thought, man, I just want to have one of those NASA hats, man.
That silk trucker hat.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, and this is another thing too for all you millennials out there. When Woody and I were growing up, and everybody else around this era, you know, now I look at NASA. I mean, I still think it's pretty cool, but I think it's responsible for a little bit of misinformation and cover up. But back then, you know, the cover of the movie, The Right Stuff, remember?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
I mean, when we were in the band The Modern Society, like we were constantly trying to figure out ways to kind of play up that vibe of like that sort of like old school like cosmonauts and like 80s astronauts and those like badges and stuff, pretty much in like every photo shoot or graphic, you know, that we could think of. You know, we were always trying to like play up that vibe because it was so cool in the 80s.
Oh yeah, man. I mean, I was just obsessed. Another cool thing that happens around this section is you're basically introduced to Sarah Jessica Parker, who, man, when this movie, dude, I had the biggest crush on her whenever I saw this movie for the first time. She's got like a little thing of like purple hair. There's this line where she's like talking to David and she's like, you know, you're kind of cute. Did anybody ever tell you that before? And he's like, I mean, my mom sometimes, but I don't think that counts. And
I feel like your son Woodrow would say that
for sure,
to
man,
a T.
for sure. It's that like super cute like innocence that
naive, very like innocent.
But I just thought she was like, man, the hottest thing ever.
Yeah. Let me also put out an apology because I've said that she looked like a horse in a previous episode, and I had totally forgotten that she was in this movie. But I do remember being obsessed with this girl. So like when I went back and saw that it was her, I immediately kind of felt bad.
You should have probably felt bad anyway. I mean
she does. Does have sort of a. She does have sort of a horse face later on in life.
No, you're also introduced to this like. I just thought it was funny. This robot car, essentially, that they call Ralph, which stands for Robotic Assistant Labor Facilitator. And she jokes that she's like, basically he just kind of drives the mail around. So he delivers mail. But as you know, if you watch this movie, it's kind of the way that David plots his escape.
Yeah, it's totally like the MacGuffin. You know, it was. I mean, that's like the whole point of it being there.
Yeah.
Still cool though. I remember as a kid being like, oh man, it's like a robot.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
and even just like that, it's that simplistic sort of like early NASA design, man. Like you throw the NASA logo on anything from the 80s and it's like, oh my God, that looks so cool.
Yeah. And it had like a siren on the top.
Yep.
I'm not real sure why, but
when these scientists and everything are trying to figure out what is this thing? Is it a threat? How does this kid sort of like connected to it all? They determined that where he traveled was like 560 light years away. And he went that fast in like 2.2 hours or something. And it's kind of like they just sort of like gloss over it. But again, this is like my only known introduction, especially as a 6-year-old, to what they call light speed theory. So they basically explain to David that, hey, just because it only felt like, or just because it was only 2.2 hours or solar hours, as they say in the movie, to you, years have passed here. And that kind of is their way of explaining, why there's missed time, how his parents and his little brother are older, but he essentially didn't change or age. And, it literally is like 2 lines of dialogue, boop, and then they just move on. But I thought it was a pretty cool way for them to kind of explain that in a simple way for a kid to just be like, oh, okay, cool, that makes sense,
Yeah, exactly. Oh, one thing also, this was actually Sarah Jessica Parker's first film.
Oh, yeah, first feature film, huh?
Pretty cool. Which, I mean, for a Disney movie, it's pretty big.
Yeah, man.
Oh, also, I did find, while you're looking, I found that the forest that it was filmed in, where he I guess gets abducted, and in the beginning he's looking for his brother, is the exact. It was somewhere. It's like a garden in Miami that Iron Man 3 was filmed.
Oh yeah.
And it's where like the Mandarin. It was like where he lived.
Yep, that's awesome, man.
I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. So essentially, after these scientists kind of, and I don't know if we want to just explain the whole film. I think maybe not, right?
I mean, let's just hit like the highlights.
Yeah. So basically, like this, they explain this light speed theory to David, and he just kind of freaks out. Like, it's just too much for him to comprehend as a 12-year-old, and just like runs out of the room. And he starts to have these like telepathic communications between himself and the ship, essentially. And he kind of sneaks out, and sneaks into the ship. And that's kind of when we kind of are introduced to the ship, which is a character in and of itself.
Yeah.
Essentially, the ship inside of it, it's the robotic commander Trimaxion drone ship. And as we know, as the audience, the kid's just like, okay, cool, I'm going to call you Max for short. Right?
Yeah.
And he keeps on referring to David as the navigator. And from here, they essentially kind of escape and go on the run. The purpose for that, I think, is Max, the ship, is trying to kind of re-download the star charts that are in David's head. And so they kind of like...
Because he said that he hit like some like power lines or something.
Yeah. But essentially, the information transfer just wasn't complete or something. I got to be honest, it's kind of vague to me why he needed David in the first place.
Yeah.
You know what? I think he collects people from other places because as they are kind of touring the ship is when he kind of shows David like these little alien specimens or whatever. And
but he never made it out that he was like.
Well, he says
the intention was.
He says that he returns them. He doesn't keep them. He just like studies them, and then he returns them back to their normal time, and it's all coming back to me now. And
the reason you saw like the little alien character, I won't spoil that, but the reason that you see that little character, which by the way, there's 3 or 4 shots where you totally see strings connected to it.
I didn't see that.
Yeah. When he's like dancing, but is because I guess his planet was destroyed and he was orphaned. Which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And which actually, knowing that, like seeing that last scene now, I never realized that. But
that makes sense.
It goes back with David.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, cool.
Yeah. So like during the kind of mind transfer or whatever, that's when he introduces David to these other specimens. So there's other ones. There's like this little like slimy thing. And one that like bites his hat off and chews it up, and basically that's when Max explains like, I just kind of like study them, but then I return them back to the exact time that I took them. That didn't happen with you because something messed up or something. I guess like you said, he hit a power line or something. I'm not real sure.
Yeah, it was like real brief, but I think that's what it was.
And that little character that you're talking about, the cute one that. Mm-hmm. If you've seen this movie, you know exactly what we're talking about. It's a little like almost like a bat-like creature. Yep. I didn't know this, but its name is Puck Marin. And it says that like he's the last of his kind after a comet destroyed his planet.
There was one part, and I looked this up, but I couldn't see anything. But there's like a brief line when I think it's when the ship is sort of explaining this whole part. You know, when he's talking about galaxies and taking specimen from this star and this, galaxy, I guess. And he's like kind of just rolling through all these words, and then he says like Pixar. I was hoping that it was like a little sort of like, I don't know, some kind of like tie-in Easter egg, but I looked it up and didn't see anything, but I wonder if...
That's it. Maybe that's where they got the name.
Maybe, yeah.
Man, that's very interesting. I think as far as plot goes, we're good there. I don't want to give away the ending, really. Mm-hmm. If you haven't seen it in a long time, definitely go back and watch it. But one thing that
it holds up, man. Pretty good.
Yeah, man. I mean, one thing that I loved about it and I'll say this is what I found out about it. The visual effects, I thought, for the time, 1986, were pretty darn good.
Oh,
now, of course, with the little creatures and stuff, it's a puppet, right? But the ship itself, what I learned was this is early CGI, obviously, and it's the first time, according to the designers, that reflection mapping was used in a feature film. Essentially what that means is, this ship is this, like the whole thing, the outside is like chrome. And as it's flying either over a field or over the ocean, you see whatever that it's flying past kind of reflecting off of its body. And so,
you all right, pal?
My voice is all messed up. The visual designer said that James Cameron actually said that seeing that ship is what inspired him for the T-1000 in Terminator. Yeah, in Terminator 2.
Yep.
And
it's weird because there's something about that ship when I was a kid that I was just obsessed with that look. And I think it was when T2 first came out, it was like all came back home. It was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
In fact, so much so, which it's so funny that we're even talking about this. None of this was planned, but I was actually thinking about this earlier this week. So my stepdad was like building an office, and which later ended up being my like loft, like studio. We rehearsed up there a little while and stuff. But there was a blizzard in 94, I believe, and he had to replace a bunch of stuff. So like the heating and air, the little like thermostat, I remember it was in the trash, and I had maybe just seen T2, and I literally broke the little thing and was keeping mercury around in a test tube, which is highly toxic.
Oh, yeah.
And like really not safe at all.
Yeah.
But like I was obsessed with that texture and literally carried this. I mean, I would carry it to school in like a little chemistry set test tube.
100%. As you're saying this, I'm wondering how many kids from around that time, 92 or whatever, ended up getting mercury poisoning or just having, I mean, like, because like same thing. I'm 90% sure that I was like, oh, there's some in this thermometer crack and just like let it roll around in my hand. I'm not joking.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
So maybe that explains my memory loss. I don't.
Well, and maybe I just said Mabry. I actually live in Mabry Ridge. Maybe James Cameron actually did the same thing.
I mean, you never know. I mean, I don't know why he would have. Well, I don't know.
You never know.
You never know. Let's hit up some like interesting trivia about the movie.
Yeah, let's do it.
Huh? Broke up.
I just said, yeah, let's do it.
Okay. A lot of really kind of popular kid actors, they were kids at the time, auditioned for this lead role. Two that I found that honestly kind of blew my mind was Chris O'Donnell and...
Oh, Rosie O'Donnell's son, yeah.
Shut up. And Joaquin Phoenix, man.
Wow.
Yeah. But the reason they didn't get is they wanted somebody like less known, less sort of like, mainstream Hollywood. And the kid that ended up getting the part, who played David, is a guy named Joey Kramer. And he kind of came into the audition and completely, according to the casting director, she said that he just 100% like swept her off her feet. Essentially, she's like, you're watching kids come in or an actor come in all day long saying the same exact thing, performing it basically in the same exact way. And then all of a sudden this kid comes in and it just sells you on it.
Wow.
It was just, it's fascinating. This is a cool fact too. When the car and the family is driving up to the house after that dog frisbee competition, the song on the radio is "You're the One That I Want" from Grease. And it was just like a little nod to the director's movie,
Oh, cool.
Oh, dude, how cool is this? Okay. The guy that designed the design for the spaceship, his story is pretty incredible. His name's Edward Eath. Now, I'm not sure what else he did because I didn't go that far, but just learning about the story of how he got the job is pretty incredible. So this guy, fresh out of art school, essentially, he is sitting in this lobby with his like portfolio in front of him. He's there for a job interview. He's kind of thumbing through it or whatever and just kind of like nervously, just kind of like, fidgeting and stuff. The director, Randall Kleiser, basically sees this kid sitting there. He kind of walks by. He just by chance kind of like sees a small piece of this kid's art. And he's like, "Hey man, let me look at that." And he's talking to him. He's like, "What are you doing here?" And the kid's like, "Well, I'm here for a job interview." And as he's talking, the director is just kind of flipping through and he hired him on the spot, dude.
Whoa.
Yeah. Then
that's amazing.
He tells the kid, go home, put together some ideas of what we want. And the designer says that, it's now that he's been in a visual designer for movies and stuff for so long, it's just common. The director will say like, give us something that nobody's ever seen before. And he's kind of like, okay, well, great.
Good luck.
Yeah, that doesn't tell me anything. But so he goes home. He does a bunch of little like thumbnail sketches of a bunch of different designs, hands it over to the director. The next day he gets a call. It's the director. He's like, "Hey, I passed these over to, my buddy Steven Spielberg." He kind of looked at him and the designer's like, "Huh?" He's like, "Dude, my first ever sketches for a job got passed over to Steven Spielberg." Is that,
dude, that's
that's incredible, right?
Yeah.
So
that's amazing.
So awesome. And to hear him kind of talk about how he ended up coming up with the fact that, he, everything from the way the ship looked to the way it looked whenever it flies, it kind of elongates and becomes more aerodynamic.
Which, man, as a kid, that was
so cool. And even he came up with the idea, the concept that instead of just having like a door that just like kind of slides open like every other spaceship we've seen as kids up into this point, how it just kind of melts away and then that mercury substance, sort of liquid metal, turns into steps, And that's how you kind of get
And they're just floating there.
They're just floating. And man, that's another thing that I am so glad I watched this documentary about, because I've always wondered this. Like, how did they make those steps just like float there? How in the world? Because there's no wires. You can't see anything. And the director and the producer talked about, because they spent so much money on the CGI for the ship, there was a couple sections in the movie where they're like, we just have to do this the old school way. And one of them, and it was just a camera trick. So what they did is they got these steps, and then because of the angle of the camera, you can't see that there are these like metal steel rods that are holding these things up, like going away from the step. So like if you're facing like at an angle, the side of these steps, there's a rod in that same angle behind it, essentially. And so, because of those metal rods, because it wasn't like there's nothing underneath it holding it up, you can see the steps sort of like give way a little bit. And that's the part that always fascinated me when I was like younger. Like, how do they make it like where it like bends under their weight and stuff? Like, what's going on?
Well, and especially in the scene, it's so funny you're talking about this because, just watching it just minutes ago, the scene where, spoiler, where it lands at a gas station and there's like the family gets out of their car and the dad thinks it's just sort of a roadside attraction at the gas station. And you see the kids like behind these steps and they're, I was expecting to see like, because sometimes like you'll have green screen or whatever and, they'll or sort of kind of go in and sort of like digitally kind of erase, whatever, like the ropes or the frame or whatever, and there's none of that. I mean, it looks super clean, and like you said, there's this slight little like give on the steps that it still stands up. Now, I will say the only scene in the entire movie, I mean, obviously like some of the puppetry stuff of the alien, but I love that stuff. I mean, that's like straight up George Lucas, Yoda kind of vibes. But the only thing that was a little weird is like when the steps would kind of like go back up, they would be like blub, 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 blub. Turns to that sort of liquid metal.
Yeah, the animation
that
there
looks a little early.
Even whenever it like comes
CGI.
Down too, it's kind of early.
Yeah, exactly.
Early CGI.
Yeah.
I mean, there's another part that they talked about. When the ship itself is coming out of the hangar, and it just looks just massive, and everybody looks super small in front of it. It's actually like the size of just slightly bigger than a football. In that scene, it's all camera angles, dude. Yeah, isn't that insane?
Man, that's amazing.
So, like,
but
the director of photography was talking like he's like, people don't do that kind of stuff nowadays because, well, they don't know how, because they haven't had to.
I mean, that's true. Yeah. I mean, but they would have had to make a.
There was a practical
when it's like in the truck.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that and the part where after they escape, they go to they're like parked at that gas station.
Okay. That's what I was talking about with the kids. Yeah.
So that was a full, like, quote unquote, full size model.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah, and then the other scene where I guess you would have to have that when anytime you see the kid like stepping out of it, or like when he's kind of like just looking out the window or the door or whatever. Man, I wonder where that's at now.
Oh. I actually found that too. So I think one of those practical effects models is used as something else in Disney, like at Disney World. Yeah, pretty cool.
I would love to own that.
Now I think we got to talk about Max.
Okay.
Well, I think you got to talk about it because you're the one that told me, and I completely forgot that it was him.
Okay. So when we first decided we were going to do this, I said, and what's weird is I haven't even thought of this movie for years, but like, just my memory, I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure, because we had just watched the new like Pee Wee Herman movie. What is it called?
Pee Wee's Holiday or something like that.
Pee Wee's
it's on Netflix.
Big Holiday,
something like
maybe?
that.
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
But being like in the Pee Wee mood, I was like, I think I could swear that it was Pee Wee Herman, and you said,
I said,
man, it's not him.
Yeah, I said, like, I remember it. Thinking that it sounded like him, and I just thought maybe they were capitalizing on that sort of like
that
silly Pee Wee. Yeah,
Yeah.
And so I didn't believe it. I was like, I don't think so, man.
Well, and then what's interesting too is when I looked into it, originally it was like, oh, well, that's not Pee Wee Herman. But apparently Paul Rubens, who had already become a movie star in Pee Wee's Big Adventure by then, he used the pseudonym Pall Mall, which, as you know, is the name of an old cigarette brand. And that's the name in the credits. Kleiser explains Paul did not want to have his name used in the project because he wanted to stay low-key and have it be a surprise, which is pretty awesome. And honestly, there's some like voice modulation stuff, which kind of
especially in the beginning,
kind of low. Well, it kind of like even throughout the whole thing, like even when you're like, oh, well, that's definitely him. It's still kind of lowered, like modulated down, maybe half a step or something. So you could listen to it and be like, I don't think that's him. I think it's just somebody who is kind of trying to sound like, Pee Wee, basically. But yeah, I love that. I think it adds so much sort of character. And I think that was an interesting choice too, because everything's very sort of like cold in the ship, even though I thought it was incredible as a kid. Like the captain's chair, like his navigating chair, I guess, technically. But, it would have been really easy and really sort of typical to go the route of having a very sort of like cold, and which it kind of does in the beginning. It says like compliance, and then it does whatever you ask and stuff.
Dude, that used to make me laugh so much. He'd be like, we need to go. And he's like, compliance.
Yeah, exactly. But they could have just kept with that super cold kind of thing. But I thought it was an interesting choice to inject, basically Pee Wee Herman.
Yeah, it happens kind of after they do that like sort of mind transfer, to get the coordinates and everything. It's kind of like the moment that all of a sudden like Max takes on some sort of like human characteristics. And then of course, like I gotta say, man, I also think this movie was where I became obsessed with the Beach Boys, man. I mean, I'd heard, Teen Wolf, there's whenever he's surfing on top of the van, and then this one, I think those two kind of really turned me on to the Beach Boys because, my parents didn't really listen to the Beach Boys, so I have to.
Well, my mom was like always into like oldies back then. We had a station here in Atlanta called Fox 97, and so we were always listening to that. And then my stepdad, when he came around later, he was a huge like Beach Boys fan too. So, but back then, I mean, at the age of 5, I don't necessarily remember that, but it was probably new to me then.
I just remember like, that scene is just, I just wanted to do it, man. I wanted to be like listening to the Beach Boys, flying a dang spaceship, no real responsibilities, just literally the sky's the limit.
Yeah, exactly. So when would you have seen this for the first time?
Man, I really do think it was like, man, I don't know. I don't remember if I saw it in the theater or not. I want to say that I did, but I don't know. It could have been one of those things where somebody, like a friend or like a cousin or something rented it. But I'm fairly certain that we saw it in the theater. But after that, as soon as it was on video, my brother and I watched it all the time.
Yeah, well, I didn't until like much later for some reason. But this is like, oddly enough, this is like one of my sort of favorite kind of memories as from my youth that I remember as being like a really young kid. So my dad left when I was 4 or 5. I guess it would have to been 4 or 5. And I would go to a babysitter, which was my aunt, technically. Well, my grandmother's sister's daughter. Is that right? Aunt?
Grandmother's sister. Relative. Relative.
But she was my babysitter, and there were a few other kids. That's what she did as her job out of her house. And I remember it was like such a big deal that we were going to go to Lakeshore Mall and watch a movie. And that was just so cool because, as a kid, before school started, I guess I would have been maybe 4 then because I wouldn't have been in school yet. But I remember specifically we went to McDonald's, which was like really cool because you had all the other kids that was at my that were at my babysitter's that you were seeing every day. There was Big Keith and Little Keith, and then there was my first. Big Keith was a jerk, and he would beat up on everybody. And then Little Keith was a total little nerd who got beat up a lot. There was a guy named Scott. That was my first look at what autism looked like. There was Suzanne, Nathan. Anyway, I'm going on a little too much about this, but I remember we went to McDonald's before we went to see the movie, and I don't even know what this would be from, but I remember out of the Happy Meal, I had like a little blue, like a Jeep, kind of like an SUV, like Jeep toy.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember like holding it in my hand like the whole time we watched Flight of the Navigator.
Yeah.
And we went and we saw the movie, and
Big Keith
it was
shit
just
his
a great
pants.
experience. Do what?
Big Keith shit his pants.
Well, little Keith probably did because Big Keith was beating him up. But yeah, it was just such a great memory. And I remember, it's just weird that you remember those kind of things. But yeah, I remember being like obsessed with this movie.
Yeah. I mean, like I said earlier, man, I wanted anything and everything NASA. And I thought,
oh, yeah.
Like as a kid, I mean, maybe it's not a weird thought. I don't know. As a kid, I was like, man, I mean, because you just want this movie, it even, like, not to go into the ending, but it does end well. Like he ends up coming back, being dropped off. It's kind of actually like rewatching it. Like I remember being sad when he's saying bye to Max, you know, and you're like, oh man. And then,
well, and I remember as a kid with like OCD tendencies, I remember as a kid, like I would always have like just through my childhood, like if we were watching a movie and like say Luke Skywalker, like somebody knocks his like lightsaber out of his hand, it would just like bother me so bad until he was able to get his lightsaber back. Or like if something was like taken away, if like somebody's weapon was like, you know, destroyed or something. And so I do remember like throughout the movie, like having this feeling of, you know, because he's 8 years into the future. Mm-hmm. His parents are old. I remember just having like such a hard time with like, and this sort of like anxiety of, God, it's never going to go back to the way it was. And it just like bothered me. So it was really cool when it finally sort of, you know, gives it closure on that and he kind of goes back.
Yeah. And to be honest, like I had kind of forgotten, like, how does it all wrap up, you know?
Yeah.
And part of the reason that I was concerned with that was like, you know, I do kind of want to like show, I wonder how this holds up in terms of, will my kids think it's lame or cool?
Yep.
And I kind of feel like, well, and that's why I wanted to know, like, does it end like, you know, I remember it kind of ended cool, but is it like weird? Is there like something kind of different, you know? But after rewatching, it's like, no, man, it ends, you know,
pretty good,
happy, you know, because I think just like we were when we were kids, kind of scared of the concept of being around your parents, all of a sudden they just aged 8 years and you haven't, is just kind of like a weird thing to kind of digest as a little kid. And I don't want,
it kind of, even though it was like his parents, it still gave that vibe of like they were kind of imposters in a way because you know, they weren't the parents that he left, you know, when he left originally.
But all in, I thought it was awesome. I mean, honestly, I totally, because of the last time that I watched it was like, you know, 15, 20 years ago, I fully expected to be like, man, this is going to be kind of tough to get through. Look out, Sonya. And it wasn't, man. Actually, I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, me too.
And visually, man, there were a lot of cool, like, I love, they do this in E.T., they do this. So, I mean, I think this guy, and he even says it in this documentary, which I forgot. We got to talk about that real quick. The director talks about how he's like, went to school with Spielberg and stuff. So you can see some similarities in terms of certain shots. Like anytime there's like almost like a sunset slash, you know, oh God, what is it? Like a silhouette shot where it's like you're looking down the street, the sun's kind of setting, and then like there's something happening. The action's like kind of coming towards you and like it's in shadowed. And it reminds me of like there's a scene in E.T. like that where it shows like the scientists or the astronauts kind of like walking up the street. Same kind of scene. Even some of the, like we've said before, the woods scenes.
Oh, it's so good, man. Apparently, the director, Kleiser, was elected into the Science and Technology Committee of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in 2010. And he was like looked at by his peers, by, you know, Lucas and Spielberg as being really cutting edge. And apparently this movie was the first use of image-based lighting and an early use of morphing in a motion picture.
Yeah.
So that's really cool.
Yeah, man. And it was actually his brother that was using that technology to morph. So when we're talking about that, we're talking about when the ship, again, goes from its just normal state to like the elongated form. It shows, it's animated to morph into that more aerodynamic design. And it was his brother who was using that for a Tide commercial, where the Tide bottle kind of morphed into the map of the United States. And he saw that and he's like, hey, I mean, the chance things that happen, man, it's just incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about synchronicity a lot. I mean, just imagine if he hadn't been around his brother and seen that morphing, then he may not have. He said, "We got to have that. We got to do that." And so that's kind of like how all that came about, which is really, really cool. So a lot of the stuff that I found was because of this documentary called "Life After the Navigator." It came out in 2020, and you can stream it for free on like Tubi or one of those things. So definitely look it up. Just like I think there's a lot of sort of like tragedy that surrounds like kid actors and stuff. And I've actually wondered for a long time whatever happened to this kid. And the documentary kind of goes into it a little bit. Sadly, like, well, he's still alive, which is the good part. But
he's on heroin.
Yeah. I mean, basically, he's a recovering heroin addict for real.
Oh, wow. Sorry about that.
He had a interesting childhood. Like one of the things he says in the documentary is like, he didn't really want to be an actor, really. He thought this was, he kind of got into this just as like fun. He did like a couple plays. He was in a Tom Selleck movie called Runaway. And then he got this. And he went back to school. And he said, it was just tough because like I went back to school and people like the kids, like the older dudes would be like, I mean, you're just like a stuck up like actor dude. And then like they would beat him up and stuff. And so one of the ways that he kind of, I guess, one of the ways that he kind of tried to like fit in was by using drugs and, just being like the party guy. And that's kind of how he fit in. And, we've all got that friend in high school or something that's just like the party dude. Yep. And so he just kind of never really got out of that trajectory. He never really, left that path essentially. And it just kind of got worse and worse. In 2016, he actually got arrested for attempted bank robbery in Canada, where he's from, and served like 2 years in prison.
Wow.
And he's, like I said, he's in recovery. And, in the interview, in the documentary, it's just interesting. It's sad, but, it's just interesting. It would be interesting, I think, for parents who are either already entertainers or thinking about their kids being in entertainment. It's like taking away that sort of like normal sort of childhood. Now, his mom is pretty out there in terms of, you'll see what I mean whenever you watch the documentary. The bottom line is he's still alive. He's just in recovery and he's trying to be a better person.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. But it's a great documentary.
It's definitely like a cautionary tale. And, I feel like when I was younger, you kind of had this view of like kid celebrities. Like, I mean, I think Macaulay Culkin is probably the most sort of perfect example of this. But like you look at these kids who are just like huge celebrities and, as like once you kind of get into like early adulthood, you kind of look down on like, oh, well, why would he have to be homeschooled? Why would he have to like have his own like private teacher? You kind of look at that in sort of a negative light of like, oh, well, it's just, he's rich, so they got that. But really, you think about how difficult it was, just growing up as a normal kid. And then kind of like with this kid, it's like he was in a movie, he was a celebrity, he was with Tom Selleck in Runaway. I mean, that's huge. Yeah. And then he's going to try to go back to high school, and then, I mean, that's a big target on his back. So I totally get it. I mean, I feel like that's almost the only option for having a sort of normal childhood is, for these kids to have their own like little private teachers and that kind of thing.
Yeah, but we digress.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say this. I loved it, actually. Sure, there's some parts that were like very 80s and very like sort of like, okay, well, that doesn't look perfect. But in general, man, I mean, I think
it's so charming, though, man.
It is, man. And out of a lot of the movies that we've seen recently, that we've talked about, this movie put me right back in 1986.
Me too. I totally agree. And I think any sort of, you know, quote unquote lacking moments in the movie, honestly, I think well, number one, I think if you're watching this, you know, to kind of relive that nostalgia, if you saw it as a kid or younger in life, I think any of the things that maybe we would watch in like older movies and think, that doesn't really hold up as far as effects or, you know, visual effects or anything. But I think any of those things that are sort of lacking, I guess you would say, are they kind of add even more for like the nostalgia and like the
overall charm.
Yeah, like for example, like I was saying, the only thing that visually to me that was a little like, that doesn't really hold up is like when the steps do this like little liquid metal, you know, kind of bubbles out, and then, you know, basically they run it in reverse to go back up. It's cool because, yes, it does look a little cheesy, and yes, it is a little whatever, but it kind of also shows you exactly what time that would have come out, you know, so like you're saying, Woody, it really does take you right back to that era.
It's one of those things where even if you're not going to show this movie to your kids because you think, well, they might not like it plot-wise, it's a great movie to show them, to show like, you want to know what it was like when I was a kid?
Yeah,
Beep.
right.
This is what it looked like, you know? And it's a great sort of, I don't know, man, just a great representation of that era, truthfully.
Yeah, so I have a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old, like I've said before, and I am a little weary of just the missing time and the family being like aged, you know, and he's stuck in that kind of, at the age that he's at. So I'll probably wait, but I mean, do you think you're going to let Woodrow watch it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the only risk I run is he's just bored with it, you know?
Yeah.
But I mean, I would probably even let, like, it's funny because our youngest she's good, like 3.5, almost 4 years younger. But she ends up kind of liking the stuff that her older brother likes. So I'd probably let her watch it. She'd get bored too, I think, though.
Yeah. Well, I think you know, you kind of don't really see the ship for a while. So, you know, you don't really see that for, I don't know, maybe a good 20 minutes.
See, man, I feel like the pacing was great.
Yeah, I thought it was good.
Right? Like, a lot of times when you watch some of these old movies, you're thinking like, well, you know, I got to give it a pass and it takes forever. I mean, heck, and before I say this, I'm going to preface this with, this movie that I'm about to say is one of my favorite all-time movies. But E.T., man, like, the pacing is much slower in that movie.
Yeah.
And it's outstanding. It's fantastic. I love everything about it. But I feel like Flight of the Navigator is a little bit easier to digest as a kid than E.T.
Okay.
And my kids liked E.T. They've already seen it. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And it held their attention the whole time?
Yeah. I mean, they watched it when they were at like my in-laws' house or something, spending the night. So like my mother-in-law doesn't play that game. She's just like, we're picking a movie and boop, that's it. And so they watched it. So in other news, I should get it tomorrow. I think I'm going to be setting up, hopefully, if all the right things come in, an outdoor movie situation. So maybe I'll let them watch Flight of the Navigator outside.
Dude, that's perfect.
Yeah, man.
Also, by the way, did you notice the in the title credits when it was first coming on, like you were able to see like the little film lines? Did you notice that?
No, you mean just like little artifacts in the film?
Yeah, almost like it was taken from like a filming of it like later or something.
Oh, man.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just watch like the very, very intro and you'll see what I'm talking about.
Man, that's awesome.
It's like that cool film roll kind of like, you'll see what I mean. Yeah, so I guess overall...
2 thumbs up, right?
2 thumbs up. Well, 1 out of 10. What are you going to give it?
Oh, out of 10? Whew, man.
Well, on the 80s movie scale.
Let's call it out of 5.
Okay, 5.
Out of 5, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. And I say that because it's hard to be a 5 out of 5 with an 80s movie in general.
I think I go 5 out of 5.
So
just
average it out, we'll say it's a 4.5 out of 5.
4.5 out of 5. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, you could convince me, but yeah, I mean, I think it was very well done.
Well, it kept your attention.
That's true.
And it wasn't like, for us to see this stuff, like, we constantly talk about nostalgia.
Yeah.
And so, like the Ewoks movie, for example, there's a lot of that I kind of trudged through because it was. Like brought back that nostalgia. Yeah. Whereas this, honestly, there's a lot of amazing sort of nostalgia moments, but I think it holds up and it keeps your attention the whole time without relying on, nostalgia.
Yeah, I agree. So cool, man. Well, I think this is a great place to wrap it up. And all in, you can watch it on, I think you can stream it on Disney Plus. If you happen to have a VCR and this tape in your collection, you could, of course, watch it there. I would say I recommend it. And I'm interested to hear what our listeners think about it. Do they think it holds up? Have they shown it to their kids? What do their kids think? Yeah. Let us know. And Tyler, where's the best place for them to let us know stuff like that?
We are typically anti-internet, but you can find us. We're actually not. You can find us over at Instagram. Probably 99% of everything we do is over there. We love all the messages. We love all the back and forth in the, the comment sections. If you want to tell us a spooky story or something funny that happened or whatever that's more long form, feel free to hit us up at thatwouldberadpod@gmail.com. Yeah, one thing I do need to say is I was really expecting you to edit out the little almost flub on the intro last week where I said, hey, welcome back to your favorite, and I almost said episode.
Yeah.
And I was like, welcome back to your favorite
podcast.
But you didn't do that, so I look like an idiot. Yeah. But yeah, other than that.
I will say one thing that before we close, we say it every week. It means the world to us that you, listening to this right this second, no matter where you are on Earth, or like if you're listening to this in your car, maybe you're other planetary, or maybe you're interdimensional, and you're listening to our podcast, it literally just means the absolute world to us that you're taking the time to do it. I mean, we can't say it enough. Again, like I say, even if you get tired of us saying it, too bad. We're always going to say thank you so much because it's just amazing to us, and it's never going to not be amazing to us. So thank you to everybody that, as soon as we release any information about the new episode, people are sharing it on their Instagram pages, telling their friends about us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and like we've started saying at the end of every episode, if you haven't told anybody about it, get out there and tell one single friend about the episode or the podcast, and keep spreading that word. Like what he said, we couldn't do it without you. We appreciate you coming back week after week, and it really means a lot to us. Make sure you go check out our merch store, which is all in our link tree in our bio on Instagram, and we'd really appreciate it. So we love you, we appreciate you, and as always,
be rad.
That's the way it goes. My favorite song on the radio. time where I just needed some sunshine. You were already dead before you became a ghost. You always said our future would